Hey, so tomorrow is Mother's Day, and so we have some roses. The kids are going to go around and pass out roses to every woman here, as a token of thanks and gratitude for the mothers in our lives, who are not always our biological mothers, or who couldn't always be mothers, but are mothers to somebody. And we have some cake, I think, in the back. Nathan picked up cake yesterday. I tried to order a cake. I was too late. Nathan went to Sam's and was too late to get the ones that said Happy Mother's Day. Just know that the chocolate cake back there that has nothing on it to do with Mother's Day is a Mother's Day cake, all right? It's cake for Mother's Day. Everybody got one? If you're a mother or a woman, you didn't get a rose, raise your hand. All right. All right, so tomorrow is Mother's Day. I don't know how every single year I end up pulling Mother's Day and Father's Day messages. That's okay. I love to give honor to our parents. I think mothers are probably the most important figures in our life when it comes to growing and maturing and being nurtured and growing into who we are. Fathers are too, but mothers have a unique place. I was thinking about some things that, as we're children, we hear our moms say some crazy stuff, and we're like, man, that's crazy. Why is she talking like that? And then as you become an adult, you find yourself saying the same things. Like, you're under my roof, you'll live by my rules. And as a kid, you're like, ain't no way, I can do what I want, I'm not asking you, I'm telling you. Well, it sounded like a question to me, but don't make me turn this car around. That's a good one for me, because even I say the same thing, but how many times has a mom actually turned the car around? Anybody? Not many. Money doesn't grow on trees. I didn't even understand the concept of money, but now I do. Money definitely doesn't grow on trees. When you have kids, you'll understand. And I thought I understood everything in the world back then, and now, as I have kids, I definitely understand what my mom meant. I found some funny phrases that talk about why being a mom is unique. Cleaning a house full of kids is like brushing your teeth with Oreos. I don't want to sleep. This is my wife's favorite. She says this often. I don't want to sleep like a baby. I just want to sleep like my husband. When your mom voice is so loud that even the neighbors start cleaning their room. Here's one that, we'll just say it and see how it comes out. They say to test out babies' names, say them over and over, to make sure that you would want that name to be said, but really they ought to get moms to just say mom over and over and over and over and over again and see if that's what they want to hear for the rest of their life. Moms sometimes are the most underrated people on earth. Any moms feel like that's the case, like underrated, like people don't see the work that you do or have done, or that's right, they are definitely some of the most underrated people in life. Anybody feel like as a mom you've been underscored by the dad maybe, or your husband, underscored by other people for the things that you do, maybe even underscored by your own children? Here's a name I want to ask. Does anybody know? And if you don't say the answer. Just, I'm just asking if you know this name. If you know this name in the Bible, if you're very familiar with this name, just kind of raise your hand. Who knows who Yocheved was? Yocheved. Anybody know who Yocheved was? There's a couple of people. Yeah. More than I expected, but we are a true Bible studying congregation. But I think Yocheved gets underscored by the biblical narrative of her son. Right? She gets underscored by that. And there's a good reason for that. Her son does great things. But her impact is so great too. Because without her and her work and her faithful work, her son would never be able to do the things that he did. And it truly was her faith that allowed those things to happen. So we're going to read out of Exodus 2, just 1 through 10. I'll read and you can read along. And we're going to talk about Yocheved. and see how great of a mother she was. So Exodus 2, verses 1 through 10, now a man from the family of Levi married a Levite woman. The woman became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was beautiful, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could no longer hide him, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with asphalt and pitch. She placed the child in it and sat it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. Then, Then his sister stood at a distance in order to see what would happen to him. Pharaoh's daughter went down to bathe in the Nile while her servant girls walked along the riverbank. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her slave girl to take it, and opened it and saw him, the child, and there he was, a little boy crying. She felt sorry for him and said, "This is one of the Hebrew boys." Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Should I go and call a Hebrew woman who is nursing to nurse the boy for you?" "Go," Pharaoh's daughter told her. So the girl went and called the boy's mother. Then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child and nurse him for me, and I will pay your wages." So the woman took the boy and nursed him. When the child grew older, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses because she said, "I drew him out of the water." I drew him out of the water. So if you weren't sure who Yocheved was, that is Moses' mother. Her name is Yocheved. It tells us later in Exodus. Exodus 6 tells us her name was Yocheved. And so some background to this, and I think we all know the background, but I think it's really important to understand the situation in which his mother found herself for this to happen. There was a severe famine that caused Jacob and his sons and their families to move to Egypt, where Joseph was by the time, basically the prime minister, the second-hand man to Pharaoh, second in power. And from a small band of just 70 members, their numbers grew to thousands upon thousands of people in the land of Goshen. And when the new Pharaoh came to his throne, he began to see that the children of Israel were a threat because of those numbers. And so Pharaoh, the one who didn't know Joseph, devised a plan. First, he was going to enslave the Israelites. The Bible says that they were more oppressed the more oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So his first plan wasn't going to work out because they kept multiplying. So his response is that he's going to increase the workload, and that was ineffective as well. And frustrated that his plans had not proven effective at all to curtail the rapid growth of the Israelites, he puts into effect a policy that calls for the Egyptian midwives to see that all male children born to Israelites died. Well, the midwives don't do that either. And they don't allow the boys to be killed. And so then finally, out of desperation, he commands that all male babies born of the Israelites be cast in the Nile River. And so that's where we are, where we find this story. We find that Moses is born at a time that was a culture of death. At least a culture of death for himself and for those around him. But in Acts 7, as Stephen's telling this story, he says, as the time was approaching to fulfill the promise that God had made to Abraham, the people flourished and multiplied in Egypt until a different king who did not know Joseph ruled over Egypt. He dealt deceitfully with our race and oppressed our ancestors by making them abandon their infants outside so that they wouldn't survive. At this time, Moses was born, and he was beautiful in God's sight, and he was cared for in his father's home for 3 months. When he was put outside, Pharaoh's daughter adopted and raised him as her own son. So Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in all of his speech and his actions. He was born under the threat of death. He was born in a culture of death where at any expense, Pharaoh wanted to be successful. He wanted his power to reign at the expense of anyone, including infant children, the most vulnerable people in our society. I think we live at the same age. We live at an age where mothers are the most important things in our country for the vital success of children, because the womb has become the most dangerous place where children could live. This is the most important place. This is the place of safety. What more safe place for a child to live than inside the womb of a mother? But today, the world tells mothers they don't need to be mothers. The world tells mothers that those children should be cast aside, that they should be killed. at the expense of those children's life is what we would desire, our own power and our own pleasure, just like Pharaoh. But they made a choice. And I want to look at two verses here, Exodus 2:2, where we were at. It says, "The woman became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was beautiful, she hid him for 3 months." The woman, Yocheved, saw that he was beautiful and hid him for 3 months. What a powerful move. Hebrews 11:23. This chapter of faith and faithful people in the story of God says, "By faith Moses, after he was born, was hidden by his parents for 3 months because they saw that the child was beautiful and they didn't fear the king's edict." Any moms ever feel like somebody else takes credit for all the hard work you do? The author of Hebrews gave her husband a lot of credit for what Exodus said she did. It said she hid him for 3 months, but the author of Hebrews said it was her and her husband who hid him for 3 months. Small joke. One thing that I would notice, anybody remember when they had their firstborn child especially? I remember whenever Mariah was born, we thought we weren't nervous until she was born. And then we were really nervous because now we have this child. And if you don't know how we birth children here I am taking credit for the hard work that she does, right? I'm doing just what the author of Hebrews did. She birthed children. The first two were born at a birth center in Marshall, Texas, and it was a real quick turnaround. We went there. She gave birth. About 7 hours later, we drove back home. And so we go there that first time, and her mom's there, my mom's there, and her mom is going to drive us back. We had picked her up, I think, on the way. I don't know. Anyway, her mom's driving us back or something along those lines. And we get back to our house, and her mom's there, and she's like, "Well, you've got blankets, you've got this, you've got that." And we were like fully prepared that her mom was going to be a guest in our house for the first week. And she was our guest in the house for about the first half hour. And she was like, "All right, well, good luck." Man, were we nervous. So she left. She basically dumped us back at home and said, "Hey, that's your kid now, you know." And I don't know about you, but if I would have tried to hide Mariah for the first 3 months, I don't know how I would hide her from anything, because we didn't really know at that point how to truly console. We had a rocking chair after we moved from that house. We went to build a house, and there was a rocking chair right outside our master bedroom, and it was a wood floor. And I'm telling you, I think we rubbed grooves into that floor trying to rock her quiet or rock her to sleep. I think one of the biggest miracles here is that she was able to hide him for 3 months from what was being done. What's the point of Hebrews, though? The point of Hebrews is not that her husband took credit in the book of Hebrews. The point of Hebrews is that he was hidden by faith. That it was the faith of Yocheved, the faith of her parents, okay? It was by faith that he was hidden. That she trusted God, that she would be able to hide him, that God would protect him. And faith isn't like this just blind, irresponsible thing. I don't think that, or the story tells us she definitely didn't just parade her baby around and say, "I'm not scared of Pharaoh, here's my child, I'm not going to do what you said." Faith is wise. Anybody know who Charles Swindoll is? Charles Swindoll, in his book on Moses, a man of selfless dedication, he talks about faith in the context here. The faith of Yocheved. He says, "To walk by faith does not mean that we stop thinking." I think this way. I don't know about you. To trust God does not simply mean to become slavenly or lazy or apathetic. What a distortion of biblical faith. You and I need to trust God for our finances, but that doesn't give us a license to spend foolishly. You and I ought to trust God for safety in the car, but that doesn't mean we pass cars in a blind curve. We trust God for our health, but that doesn't mean we chain smoke and we stay up half the night and we subsist on potato chips and Twinkies without consequences. I'm feeling a little convicted now. Faith and careful planning go hand in hand, and they always have. The faith of Yocheved was not just that she trusted God to protect her child, but it was the trust in God that allowed her to prepare for whatever God would do after that. And she placed him in the water, right? Exodus 1, tells us that, Pharaoh had commanded all the people that they must throw their sons into the Nile River. And I never thought about it until this week whenever I was reading this story again. I never noticed that she actually obeys the edict eventually. Because she doesn't go place him on a doorstep of someone's house, and she doesn't go take him to another country. She doesn't send him off to family members. She doesn't put him up for adoption. She actually puts him in the place that the edict said. She just does it in her own way. And it seems odd to me, it seems that it's odd that she would do that. But I think this part of the story is highlighting the faith of Yocheved. And there's some questions that I have as I read it. And I think that the Bible, if everybody in here, I'm sure, understands the concept that the Bible doesn't tell us everything. And I think it doesn't tell us everything on purpose. It wants us to ask questions. It wants us to try to figure out, to think about the holes in the story. And so it doesn't tell us why she went down to the river. But some questions I've had over the years is, does she place Moses in the river at a random spot or a purposeful spot? Could mean the difference. Does she know that Pharaoh's daughter would come bathing at that same spot? Did she faithfully receive some kind of message from God that told her now, after 3 months, now's the time to go and do what I would have you to do next? Or was she just acting out of desperation? Did she just say, there's no way I can hide this child any longer, his voice is getting too loud, and she goes and puts him in the water? I think how I used to think about the story, I would think that she goes down to the bank, she places him in this basket, and then she thrusts that basket out into the current, and then little old Moses floats down the river until Pharaoh's daughter sees him and is like, oh, hey, what's in this basket? Let's see what's in the basket. Oh, it's a baby. I think I'll raise it. I tried to create an image with AI of baby Moses floating down the Nile River in a wicker basket, and I'm just not as good with my prompts yet, and it was this excited baby holding on to the basket like it was going down a rapids ride, I said, that's not going to work. What does Exodus actually say about what she does, though? But when she could no longer, this is verse 3, but when she could no longer hide him, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with asphalt and pitch, and she placed the child in it and sat it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. Sat it among the reeds by the banks of the Nile. Doesn't really seem like Moses is taking a rapids ride down the Nile River. It seems almost intentional that she placed this basket in a specific spot on the bank of the river. I would suggest that that's exactly what she wanted to do. Because what follows after that? She places him there, and she's not just wishfully thinking that he'll be okay one day and goodbye, son, good luck in life. She places him there, and then she tells Miriam, Moses' older sister, to sit and watch and see what's going to happen. The daughter of Pharaoh does exactly what's desired. Pulls him out of the basket. She had compassion on him. And I think we need to appreciate the fact that the daughter of Pharaoh, the one who pushed out an edict to kill all the Hebrew boys, had compassion specifically on this Hebrew boy. And then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, should I go and call a Hebrew woman who is nursing to nurse this boy for you? Well, if that's not a faithful plan, if we ever thought, as we're reading the first few verses, that this wasn't an intentional act, an act of faith, an act of trusting that God's going to do exactly what he should do in the situation, does Miriam just happen to bring this up on happenstance? No. Yocheved tells Miriam to go sit by the bank of the river. And I think the text wants to insinuate that she knew what she was supposed to say when what they wanted to happen happened. That she was prepared. That the faith of Yocheved was a prepared faith. That it was one that was acting with wisdom. This is an outright conspiracy. It's a faithful conspiracy, but it's an outright conspiracy to overthrow a nation. And what's the irony in this story? It's so beautiful. The baby's mother ends up being the one who raises him, at least for the first few years of life, 3 to 5 years, somewhere around there. She nurses him and she cares for him. She does what she was fearful to do. I won't even say fearful. The text never calls her fearful. She does what she probably couldn't have realistically done at threat of the death of her child, and she gets paid to do it. She pays her. And she does it in the house of the one who sought to kill him. I mean, if this isn't awesome, I don't know what is. There's a lot of speculation that happens when we think about Yocheved in these early years of Moses. And I usually don't deal with speculation. Y'all know me. If y'all have studied with me, I'm very much by the facts. Today I'm going to dive a little bit into speculation and see if we can't read between the lines of the text. But there's some speculation that happens with Yocheved. What did she teach him? What did she do, you know? Did she teach him about his heritage? Did she teach him about his family? Did she instill godly wisdom and principles in him so that he would make right decisions later on in life? I think that sometimes we take for granted our duties of parents. Any parents look back and say, I definitely took for granted my duties at times? I think I do. I'll tell you how, one way I thought of how I do that. I sit back very often, actually, and I think about my children and their ages. Mariah's 12, Maya's 10, Michaela's 8. So I'm like, all right, if I'm thinking about when my children might rightfully leave my home and go out into the world of college or industry or whatever, then I think in my head, I often think, man, okay, I've got just 6 more years to instill what all I need to instill in Mariah. I've got just 8 more years with Maya, and I've got 10 more years with Michaela, 13 more years with Malachi. Anybody ever thought that way? That's the way I think. How many more years do I have to instill in them godly wisdom? If you knew you only had 3 to 5 years, how would that change how you parent them? Because Yocheved knew her time was limited. She knew that she didn't have much time with him at all. She knew that there was going to come to a point where she was no longer needed as a nurse handmaid, and she was going to be gone. How would we change the way we parent if we knew we only had limited time? And it's not just pure speculation that there was some pouring into Moses that happens, right? Because in Hebrews, after that first verse I read, in Hebrews 24 through 28, it says, by faith Moses, when he'd grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. The language there is like when he came of age, when he was able to make a decision on his own. It's almost like Moses, at the very moment that he was able to leave and take off of himself the identity of Pharaoh, as soon as he could do that, he did it. Where'd that faith come from if that's what happened? I don't think it's too much speculation to think that at some point that faith was instilled in him by somebody. He refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter and chose to suffer with the people of God rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. For he considered reproach for the sake of Christ to be greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, since he was looking ahead to the reward. Again, by faith he left Egypt behind, not being afraid of the king's anger. Interesting thing I just thought about. It says that his parents weren't afraid of the king's anger. Where did he learn that? For Moses persevered as one who sees him who is invisible. By faith he instituted the Passover and the sprinkling of the blood so that the destroyer of the firstborn might not touch the Israelites. That's a whole lot of faith that was come upon him at one time when he came of age, when he came to the ability to make these decisions and step out on faith. Sometimes children are raised by people who aren't their biological parents. Anybody here raised by someone who wasn't your biological parents? Biological moms? Sometimes children are raised by stepmoms, adopted moms, sometimes by neighborhood moms. Do we have any neighborhood moms in here? We got a few, whether you know it or not. Here's another name that I want to ask you. There was a few hands that came up earlier with Yocheved. I want to see how many people know the name Bittiah. 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 Anybody know Bittiah? Not as many. I think I might have saw one hand that was halfway. I don't know. Do I know Bittiah? She's lesser known than Yocheved. 1 Chronicles 4 is a chapter where it gives genealogies of Judah. It gives the sons of Judah and who's coming after him. And it's in the midst of all of these seemingly random genealogies because it skips all over time. It talks about the genealogy of David and some other people, and then goes back almost to the genealogy of Judah. And in 1 Chronicles 4, 17 through 18, it says, Ezra's sons, so this is Judah's son, Ezra's sons, Jether, Mered, Epher, and Jolan. Mered's wife, Bettiah, so Bettiah, if you don't know who she is, she's Mered's wife. Anybody know who Mered is? Mered was Bettiah's wife. Was Bettiah's husband. Gave birth to Miriam, Shammai, and Ishbah, the father of Eshtemoa. Verse 18, these were the sons of Pharaoh's daughter Bettiah. Mered had married her. His Judean wife gave birth to Jared, the father of Gedor Heber, and the father of Soko, and I was doing good till I got to Jekuthiel, the father of Zanoah. Right? Bettiah was not just Mered's wife, she was Pharaoh's daughter. Who was Pharaoh's daughter? Who was Bettiah? The text just simply states that she was Pharaoh's daughter. There's some questions that have to be asked. Which Pharaoh? Which Mered? When did this happen? How did this happen? That's probably the most important question. How is it that the daughter of Pharaoh came to be married to a son of Judah? It's a good question. There's some Jewish literature called Midrash, and I try to stay away from this, but I think it's interesting. If we truly understand what Midrash means, we call our Bible study Midrash. It means to talk about the text. Midrash is a type of literature called, it's a Gothic literature. It just means the telling of a story. And the reason I don't bring it up as often as I used to is because people don't understand the literature it is. Midrash is not intended to be true stories of factual events, right? Midrash is beautiful literature that was done in Jewish history to create stories that highlighted different parts of the biblical text and draw out those meanings, if that makes sense. But a lot of times today, people go and read a Midrashic story and they're like, oh, this tells us the answer of what we don't know from the Bible. That was not the point. It never was the point. That's not why it's written. So they tell stories. We do the same things in our lives today. We have all kinds of stories in modern history, whether it's formal stories that we read in books or whether it's stories that we just make up for our kids to teach lessons about character and about wisdom and about, the drawing out the meanings of certain stories, right? So in Jewish literature, they would say Mered is Caleb, and they have a reason for that. And they're just highlighting the attributes of Pharaoh's daughter who would no doubt be rebellious. She had to rebel against her father to leave her father's house, regardless of which Pharaoh this daughter belongs to. I'm not sure about Caleb, but it goes on to talk about Bettiah as the adopted mother of Moses. It goes on to say that Bettiah is the one that raised Moses up. Again, I'm not saying this is factual, but it's interesting to see how they talk about her character. And I think it would help us to understand her character a little bit as well. Because it calls me to pause and say, even just in the one statement, that she saw the child, she recognizes that he's a Hebrew boy, and she had compassion. She had compassion on a Hebrew boy at that time. At a time where the entire society around her hated Hebrew boys, she had compassion. And I don't know that we give her enough credit, even just for that one. But in the Midrash about this Bettiah, it says that she didn't just go down and take a bath, right? It wasn't a physical bath. She was bathing, but it wasn't this physical bath. It says she went down and was washing because she had a skin disease that represented her father's idolatry. And that when she went down, she was trying to cleanse herself of her father's idolatry. Again, this is not a literal story. It's highlighting the fact that she was acting against the character of her own father. The father who worshipped idols and wanted to kill Hebrew boys, she was acting against that. This is why she was merited, they said, to be chosen by God as worthy of discovering Moses, there's something I can get behind. Because do we not think that God was in charge? Do we not think that God orchestrated the whole thing that was going on at the river that day? Because what happens if anyone other than this one daughter of Pharaoh is the one who finds Moses? It's probably off with his head. And it says that her handmaidens tried to tell her not to help the baby. This is where the Midrash gets interesting. Tries to tell her not to help the baby. They were saying, look, you know that your own father will kill you. Don't help this child. You need to do what your father said. Throw it back in the river. And then it says Gabriel, the angel, comes in and intervenes and kills all of her handmaidens. Now it got really interesting. Then it says whenever she reached out to touch, there's a text in Exodus that says she reached out and grabbed the basket. And it said the slave girl did this. The slave girl reached out and grabbed the basket. Now, the word for slave girl there is amah. It's also the same sounds, right? Same sounds, same letters. Amah can mean forearm, your forearm. So the Midrash says that her forearm stretched out 60 cubits in a miracle and grabbed the basket out of the middle of the Nile. Go, Inspector Gadget, right? And then when it says she had pity on him and she opened the basket, it talks about how Moses is called two different things in the text, in the actual biblical narrative. He's called a Yeled, which means a baby, and he's called a Na'ar, which to them means an older baby or a young child. And it says that in the text, this 3-month-old Moses is called an infant and a young boy. And he was an infant, but he was acting like a young boy. And their definition of acting like a young boy is that he wasn't making any noise. Now, I don't know what young boys they raised to say that to act like a young boy would be no noise, but that was their explanation. That whenever she opened it up, she saw this young boy, and it was an infant who was acting like a young boy, meaning he wasn't crying. And that brought attention. She said, oh my, here's a child who doesn't cry. Then it gets interesting again. It says Gabriel smacks him so that he'll cry. And then she had pity on him, and when she touched him, he stopped crying. And so that compelled her to bring him in. And all these stories are interesting, but I think it's interesting just because it highlights the way that they were thinking about this story in history. Because the Midrashim is written by multiple people over hundreds of years, and they're thinking about the story, and they're saying, here's this woman that we don't think about often, this woman who chose life over death, this woman who chose to pluck him up out of the basket and not do what her father said, this woman who had compassion on someone who wasn't supposed to have compassion. So who is Bittiah, the daughter of Pharaoh? Is she the one who raised Moses? It's definitely possible. When we look at 1 Chronicles and we look at this word daughter of Pharaoh, it definitely brings to mind Exodus 2. Because where else is the daughter of Pharaoh mentioned? Except for Exodus 2. But I would say it doesn't matter whether it's that time frame or another that Bittiah came about. What's important is that the story wants you to think about that. That's how we have to think about our Bibles. When the chronicler wrote that passage, if you read through chapter 4, it's just like, here's this son, here's his sons. Here's this son, here's his sons. Here's this son, here's his sons. But with this one, it says, here's this son, here's his sons. And oh, by the way, this son married a woman who was the daughter of Pharaoh. Her name was Bittiah, and she had these children. It definitely wants you to pump the brakes and think, who is this woman? And what's the greater significance? What does Bittiah mean? Anybody? Hebrew scholars? If I said it another way, Bat Yah, what does that mean? Daughter of Yahweh. Bittiah means daughter of Yahweh. What's greater is that the chronicler wants you to think of Exodus 2 and the only other mention of daughter of Pharaoh, but here is the daughter of Pharaoh who's named the daughter of Yahweh. How powerful. If it is that person, or whether the chronicler just wants you to think back to that story, how powerful is it that the adopted mother of Moses would change her name? And even if that's not the one daughter of Pharaoh that we're talking about, that any daughter of Pharaoh would choose to change her name to be called the daughter of Yahweh. But it makes you think. It makes you think about the woman who plucked Moses out of the water. You think she loved him? I think no doubt she loved him. And I think that we always think of Moses' mother and the tragedy that truly had to happen when she had to give him up for those years after she was nursing him. That truly is a tragedy, and I think she loved him. But there's no doubt in my mind that she thought of him as this Pharaoh's daughter thought of him as her own. She had compassion on him. She knew he was a Hebrew boy when she brought him in. And she defied the God of her people to do so. Because remember, Pharaoh himself is chief deity in Egypt. She's defying God to do that. She's saying, this God over here has told me that this child deserves death, and I refuse to do it. Maybe there was a little bit of faith in her. Maybe. Maybe it was the faith of both mothers. Anybody that's grown up in a blended home could probably speak to the idea that multiple people can pour into your life in a way that a mother can. So what does all this mean? I think what I think about when I think of these two women, both the adopted mother and the mother of Moses, I think that the faith of mothers matters so much. So much. When I think about my own household, who has more time and influence over my children than anybody else? It's Melissa. If you look at my daily life, Monday through Friday, 2, maybe 3 hours I spend with my children every day. Because I go to work, I come home, they have a bedtime at 8. I get 2, 3 hours at most with my children every day. She's there with them all day and night. While I'm snoring at night, back to what I said earlier, she's up checking Maya's blood sugar when the alarm goes off. While I'm at work all day, she's doing this amazing balancing act of making sure that they're doing their schoolwork, making sure that they're being instilled with good character. She's making them get along sometimes. And then she's allowing them to fight and work it out when they're not sometimes, which is a good lesson. She's giving them love constantly, and she's talking about God all the time with them. She has more influence on them than I do. A while back, and I'm going to read this, and you just tell me if you've ever heard this before. It says, there was a survey that found if a child is the first person in a household to become a Christian, there's a 3.5% probability that everyone else in the household will follow. If the mother is the first to become a Christian, there's a 17% probability everyone else in the household will follow. However, when the father is first, there's a 93% probability that everyone else in the house will follow. You ever heard that before? Y'all heard it? It's fake. It's made up. There's not a single study that ever said that. And what's really sad is that a Christian publication, somebody along the way in a Christian publication made up these numbers. And what does it say? They put it out there to assert that fathers have the most important role in the household and that they have to lead their families or else no one else will come to Christ. But I think you could say and you can highlight the importance of a father's role without lying, especially as a Christian publication. And it was a publication that put these numbers out, and everything else, every other publication out there, Christian publication, has shared these fake numbers for 20 years. And what's the bad thing about it? It says that mothers have a very minimal impact of their faith on others. And I'm looking at my own life and I'm saying, who's going to impact my children more than her? They see her faith more often. That's just a logistical, realistic thing. They see her faith way more than they see mine. I think it was like a year ago, Malachi didn't even realize that I preached because he leaves. He goes to class, and one day he was like, wait, you preach? I pastor a church, and they see more faith from her than me. It says that mothers have very little impact of faith on other people in general compared to men. when I think back on the influences of me coming to Christ, and I'm not talking about that there was one person who sat me down and told me the gospel story, and I accepted it. That's not what I'm talking about, because that didn't happen. If you know my story, I came to Christ alone on a park bench in Crowley Park. But when I think about the influences, when I think back through my thoughts that day, and I'm thinking about all these people in my life who had pushed me to Christ, who had shown me real faith, who had told me what it really meant to be a Christian, who had told me what I really needed in my life was everything but the stuff that I was trying to go towards. Every single one of those people except for one was a woman, was a mother. And those people were acting motherly to me. My grandmother, first person who ever really told me about the Bible. Not my dad, my grandmother. First person who shared the story with me. The first person who did more than just drop me off at church and say, I'll pick you up in a couple hours. My grandmother. Miss Dixie. Someone else's mother being the neighborhood mom to me. Instilling words of wisdom from the scriptures, knowing that I was a knucklehead. Thinking, man, God, I know you're powerful. You're going to need a lot of power with this one. Different women all throughout my history of my life were the influences that came back to me as I decided to commit my life to Christ. One of the biggest travesties I've seen in any kind of Christian publication are those fake numbers that say that a woman only has a 17% chance to influence the rest of her household with faith. What garbage. I would flip the numbers if I had to choose. That's still not based on any real facts or studies, but I would flip the numbers if I had to choose. Yocheved had to give up her son she loved for 3 months. Now, I'm not at that point in my life yet, but a lot of you have been there already. It's really tough to give up our children as they become adults. It's really tough to let go. And I think about the faith of this woman. The faith of this woman to put her son in a basket and say, I trust you, God, that when all of her other children around me, all of my friends' children, all their sons have been killed around me, I'm trusting you that you're not going to allow this to happen to this one child. And she did so because of faith. I think of Bitya, if it was his adopted mother, had to have faith to watch him leave as well and to go through the things that he did. She definitely had something that caused her to act against the will of her father. She definitely had something in her that allowed God to use her in that moment to make sure that his people would have someone to lead them out of Egypt. And if she's not the mother of Moses, Bitya had to have an overwhelming amount of faith if she was a later daughter of Pharaoh to walk out of her father's house and say, I no longer serve you as my God, I'm serving the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of the people, the creator of the universe, Yahweh. Yocheved had to choose life for her son. It almost seems like a reverse, like she's putting him in the place that was the method of death for all the children around her. She's putting him at the river that was commanded to kill all the people like her own son. And she had to make a choice. She had to face the decision, will I keep him here with me at risk of him definitely losing his life if he stays here much longer? And she had to make a choice to trust God when she put him there at the bank. She had to face that choice. I can't imagine. When we think about choices for our children, I mean, Melissa and I will wrestle for hours and days over what app to let my child have on her phone. I'm not even wrestling with letting go of my 3-month-old and trusting that God's in control. And then Yocheved had to trust God to make the decision that she did. She didn't just trust him when he was there with her. She didn't just trust him when he was being hidden. She didn't just trust him whenever she faced the decision and the decision-making process that she had to go through. She trusted him through the decision. She trusted him to use his own sister to bring her back into his life. The text doesn't tell us God was speaking with her, but man, he sure did orchestrate a lot without saying that. I would insinuate that her faith brought her to place him in the river at the very spot where she knew the things that God would work out. Maybe she knew that the character of that daughter of Pharaoh was different than all others. We can see that in our own lives. We see political figures, sometimes they're just a little different than all the others. Maybe she knew that she would come down and bathe. Maybe she knew that she would need a nursing midwife. And I would say that she did know all those things and that her faith compelled her to act on that. So this Mother's Day, I just want to encourage you to pray for the mothers in your life. This day is a little hard for some people. Some people can't be mothers. Some people, unfortunately, had bad mothers. But I guarantee you, if you think about your life, even if you had a mother who didn't act like mothers should, there's someone in your life acting that way at some point in your life. There's someone around you that's acted in a way, had compassion for you even though you were a Hebrew boy. So we can give thanks for the mothers in our lives, whether it's your biological mother, your adopted mother, your neighborhood mom. I think we should thank God for the mothers in our life. Thank God for the time that he places us as children in their presence and speaks to them so that they can speak to us. And encourage the mothers in your life. There's one thing that I think mothers need more than anything would be encouragement. And here I am speaking on behalf of them like I know, right? Just like I birthed our children. But I think mothers more than anything, if you ask, I'm trying to buy stuff for Melissa, and she's like, I don't need anything. I really just want to spend time with you and the kids. We're going on a trip next week. We won't be here. We're going to Baton Rouge. We'll stay with the Audettes. Malachi's got a kindergarten graduation down there. And they said, hey, look, y'all can have a date night in Baton Rouge. He said, you know what? I don't really necessarily want that. I really just love to go out on Baton Rouge, but with my family, with my children. I think if I could buy her all the things in the world, and she would appreciate a word of encouragement more than anything else. So encourage the moms in your life. Y'all can come on up to sing. Encourage the moms in your life around you, because you have no idea, I don't think I have any idea, how much they need it. How hard their task is. How much faith is required to be a mother on a daily basis. Even when children are gone. Even when children are gone. I hear all the time people with adult children struggling and just trusting that God's going to work something out in their children's life. Because when they leave, the faith doesn't stop. When they leave, the struggle doesn't stop. And when your children leave your home, the need for encouragement doesn't stop. So encourage mothers. Read back through the story of different women in the Bible and see how those mothers acted. Give your mother some love tomorrow, today, every day. And ask that God work through them continuously, because they have such an important role in all of our lives. If you'll pray with me, Father, we come before you today. We give you thanks. We thank you that you have given us a place to come and study your word. We thank you that you've given us a place to worship you. We thank you this weekend that you've given us mothers of faith in our life, whether our own mothers, adopted mothers, stepmothers, or just neighborhood moms, people that you've placed in our life to instill faith and godly principles in us, even when we don't think that we can hear them. Even when we hear them and we say, I don't need that, I don't have to have that years down the road we look back and say, I truly understand what that mother was saying to me. We thank you for giving us these beautiful and wonderful people of faith all around in all communities to extend your kingdom, to be able to step out when it's hardest, and to do things that are in your character when others won't. We ask that you encourage those mothers daily. that you allow your Spirit in their homes to bring them to complete peace and shalom, to wholeness and wellness, that they would feel full of energy when they have been up all night, and that they would be calm from all the fears that they suffer through daily thinking about their children. Give them complete peace and shalom. Give them wholeness and wellness. Give them the strength to be the parents that they would be to their own children and to others. And we ask that you guide all of us, lead us and direct us. Let your word be a light unto our path and a lamp unto our feet as we go through every single day. We love you, we bless you, and we give you thanks. Amen.